Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I'm your Innkeeper Vase Odin, and today we'll be introducing Survivors. Survivors are the faction of the regular Joe, normal people who have been thrown into a crazy situation. Their card pool generally rewards failure, or at the very least, being an underdog. Some of the best Survivor cards grant great benefits or success when facing terrible odds, and Survivors are the faction that can pull off the impossible. Because of this, the Level 0 Survivor card pool is thought of as the strongest overall card pool for dual-class investigators. Generally, the faction with the lowest resources, Survivors are rewarded by getting cards that have a generally lower overall cost, and even cards that grant bonuses to stats for being poor. Also more dependent on skill cards than other factions, they face the mythos head-on, surprising others with their uncanny resilience and resolve. Their weapons are generally quirky, having drawbacks in one way or another, but as Survivors make the best out of every situation, they can sometimes make their weapons work despite their drawbacks. Finally, Survivors have no cards that cost more than 3 experience points, which is a blessing and a curse. To make up for this, their lower cost experience cards have powerful effects for lower experience and resource cost, but some of the stronger ones have to be repurchased after they've been used, using more experience points if you want to purchase them again. Let's go over some of the strongest Level 0 Survivor cards. Lucky, a card that allows you to reactively guarantee success on a test that you would have failed otherwise. What makes Lucky so good is that you don't have to waste it unnecessarily. For example, Unexpected Courage provides the same bonus, a +2 to a skill test, but you have to commit it before you take the test. This means that if you would have passed the test anyway, you just wasted a card. If you pull an auto-fail, you wasted the card as well. With Lucky, you'd still have the card in your hand in both scenarios for a test you would have failed but could pass with a +2 bonus. Fight or flight. When you're on the edge of insanity, fight or flight can mean the difference between defeat and victory. But some build decks around having a low remaining sanity, with desperate skill cards fueling powerful stat boosts. Fight or flight takes it up a notch by granting you a potentially huge bonus for an entire turn. What's great is that usually the boss of a scenario is the last fight of the session, and by then you'll most certainly have some horror on you. This card has single-handedly helped me defeat countless bosses. It's also really nice that it has a bit of flexibility in letting you use it for agility instead of combat. Look what I found. Turning failure into success is kind of the Survivor calling card, and this card is another great demonstration as to why this is such a good strategy. Basically, you can try to grab a clue with a test, and if you succeed, you get to keep this card in your hand. If you fail, you can play Look What I Found and nab 2 clues instead. You have to have failed by 2 or less, so don't go trying an impossible test just hoping that you can use this afterwards. Dark Horse. A popular card and one of the few cards that people build decks completely around entirely. Dark Horse gives a +1 to all your stats, and all you have to do is be poor. The Survivor card pool synergizes very well with this card, as Survivor cards generally have lower overall resource costs. Resourceful. A versatile card that allows for you to take a Survivor card from your discard pile back into your hand. This has a fantastic effect that lets you get more than 2 uses of a single card, or even take back something that was taken away by the encounter deck. There are also a ton of combos people have come up with that do some zany stuff with this card. Just look into Arkham DB for such examples. In addition to their level 0 cards, Survivors have some really powerful higher level cards that they can purchase. Most of their cards are level 1 through 3, with some of the more powerful ones having the exile mechanic. The exile mechanic allows you to use the card for its full effect, and you'll have to remove it from your deck. If you want it back in your deck for the next scenario, you have to repurchase the card. It also doesn't go into your discard pile, so it's important to know that a card like Resourceful cannot get an exile card back once it's been exiled. Here we go. Peter Silvestri, level 2. Unlimited horror healing and a stat boost to the two most common skills that the encounter deck tests you against. What else could one ask for from a card that only costs 3 resources to play? The level 1 version is also very good, but this one blows it out of the park. Will to Survive. The sheer power of this card cannot be understated. This card alone makes Wendy a combo powerhouse. It also pretty much reduces the risk of failure completely. Most tests still have a chance of failure due to the tentacle token, even if you're 20 points above the test value. But very few effects in the game make it so that you absolutely have 0 chance of failure. Of course, you still have to get your skill value to the same level of the test that you're attempting, but with some minor planning, that shouldn't be a problem at all. A Test of Will. This card is basically the same as Word of Protection from the Mystic faction, but with some key differences. Yes, it costs an experience point to put it into your deck, and once you use it, you have to spend another experience point to put it back in your deck for the next scenario. But it allows you to use it on any non-weakness treachery for any investigator in your location. This is great because sometimes your friend draws the worst treachery, and you have no way to stop it. With this card, you'll be able to. The experience point cost is no big deal since survivors don't really have that many cards that cost a tremendous amount of experience points. Rise to the Occasion, level 3. This card allows you to take any test at a net skill value of 2 points over the base difficulty. Pretty much grants you success 80-something% of the time in standard mode, regardless of its difficulty. How it works is this. If you attempt an investigate check and your base intellect is 1 versus the shroud value of 5, you're going to get a +6 to the test. That's 2 wild icons from committing the card and a +4 from the card text. You can also commit other cards to the test and get bonuses from like static boosts and other cards like weapons and such, which will take you even higher above the difficulty. Pretty amazing. Newspaper level 2. For 1 resource, you can get a +2 to investigation when you have no clues. It seems like a one-use item at first, but most scenarios have you reset your clues whenever the act advances. The bonus clue is an additional bonus that's really nice. This is better if you get it early, and you can benefit from this several times in a scenario if you get it early enough. That's a great value for just 1 resource and 1 card, especially for a faction with very few options for getting free clues. Now let's take a look at all the investigators that are currently available for Arkham Horror, the card game. Wendy was initially thought of as a terrible investigator by the community when the game was first released. But as people got a feel for survivors and their playstyle, that mentality began to change. Then, a deck popped up on ArkhamDB claiming to have the power to win the core set mini-campaign in solo, and people started to get curious. Sure enough, the enigma that was Wendy Adams was solved, and she had become a fan favorite, easily topping many people's lists of top investigators. Don't get me wrong, Wendy is not an obvious choice, and it's not easy to figure her out without help or facing many failures first. Wendy is complex and highly dependent in combo plays. Her special ability is very strong and can help Wendy pass tests she would otherwise fail. She can ensure her combo plays don't fizzle due to a bad token pull, and she can discard events to fuel her ability without worry, as her signature allows her to replay them from the discard pile. With the rogue card pool, Wendy can leverage her agility and make the most of that ability that she has. Cards like Lucky Cigarette Case are great because they allow her to draw more cards she can commit to fuel her ability. She's not great at investigation, but she can get by well enough when needed. In the description below, I've posted a Wendy article, also a deck for you to look at in order to learn how to make the most of her. When Ashcan Pete was first released, he seemed to take the top spot as one of the strongest investigators. Having Duke start in play and being able to add 5 cards from any faction meant that Pete was good at investigating and fighting from turn 1. But somewhere along the line, Pete was overshadowed by some fancier investigators with flashier abilities. For a bit, Pete became known as a one-trick pony. Now, with the card pool having grown, Pete's versatility has grown along with it, and there are some really cool combos you can pull off with him. Cards like the Desperate Skills synergize very well with Pete. Also, cards like Rise to the Occasion are great because he has low stats that will benefit greatly from such a card. In addition, Pete can have a very potent Dark Horse build since he doesn't depend too much on resources since his best asset is Duke. Also, Duke doesn't take up an ally slot, which means Pete can have another ally alongside Duke to help him out. Some great choices are Peter Silvestri and Yaoto. The former works great with Pete because he can discard a card to ready Duke and then use Yaoto to gain skill boost based on the discarded card symbols. You can even be more cool by adding a few desperate skill cards to this mix for some really awesome Yaoto fun. Of the survivors, I must say I enjoy playing as Pete the most. His 5-card splash options give Pete some interesting cards to choose from. His high willpower gives him some cool options with the Mystic card pool, or you can become even more Duke dependent with Guardian cards. Or you can give Pete some charisma and have him run around with his pack of doggies. The possibilities are pretty much endless. The aspiring actor who works in a graveyard is a very unique investigator. He has access to most Guardian cards and can bring cards back from the discard pile with his special ability. But as straightforward as Yorick looks like to build on the surface, it doesn't take long to realize that he's far more complex and difficult than he leads on. The Guardian card pool is full of assets and weapons that Yorick can use to kill things, but with survivors being the poor class, it's fairly difficult to figure out how to pay for all of it. One thing that Yorick definitely has going for him, though, is his resilience. 2 of my favorite cards in Yorick decks are Cherished Keepsake and Leather Coat. At a cost of 0, he can keep bringing them back from the discard pile at no cost whenever he kills something, making him the second toughest investigator in the game next to the Guardian Leo Anderson. Plus, he has access to survivor cards, which are generally inexpensive, allowing Yorick to beat face through succeeding against the odds. The trick for building Yorick in solo is to not let yourself get carried away by adding too many expensive Guardian assets. Instead, I recommend using cards like Machete and Fire Axe for weapons and supplementing them with the likes of Vicious Blow, Will to Survive, and Lucky. You can then add lower cost skill cards and save your resources for clue acquisition cards like Flashlight, Scene of the Crime, Evidence, and Look What I Found. For multiplayer, I would only build Yorick as a combatant and skip clue gathering altogether so that he can have his resources free for more damage mitigation and damage dealing. His ability can be very fun, and getting spent cards back is a neat ability. I don't recommend counting on it for building your entire deck around, as some scenarios have more enemies than others, and your ability is completely dependent on having killed an enemy. Instead, take it as a nice bonus, and focus on making your deck an all-around good fighting and damage mitigation machine. When Calvin Wright was first spoiled, people had mixed reactions about him. Putting out an investigator with all zeros for stats was a bold move by the designers, and it had people debating his power level. Calvin is, in my opinion, the most difficult investigator to play. Lola Hayes is close, but for a new player, Lola is at least usable, but with the caveat that you really need to study up on timing windows in order to play her properly. Calvin, on the other hand, requires a bold and brave playstyle, and players need to have guts of steel in order to make him work. If you're the type that's worried about defeat when you have 1 health or sanity left, Calvin is most definitely not for you. You've been warned. After hearing all of this, if you're still interested in playing Calvin, know that you have to expect to start out very slow at the beginning of a scenario. You will most certainly spend several rounds just trying to get your stats to a decent level and failing very easy tests, so be prepared to play catch up for most games that you play, especially in solo. In solo, prepare yourself for games where, for example, you're going to spend 5 turns getting your sanity down to 1, only to have the cruelty of the encounter deck show its ugly face and hit you for some horror with no test, defeating you right then and there. It's just the nature of the beast with Calvin. Calvin in multiplayer can play as the group's damage soak and also as the sacrificial lamb, allowing the others to live and succeed while Calvin takes trauma. Now, don't be afraid to take trauma with Calvin because, after all, it only helps you save time in later scenarios. I can't offer you too many tips and strategies for playing Calvin, or deck building for that matter, because I've only used Calvin once. It's just not my playstyle at all, and I'd rather not give you bad advice. One word of advice that is sound is that you want plenty of damage and horror soak and mitigation, and you want to stay away from too much healing, because healing brings your stats back down. Cherish, Keepsake, and Leather Coat are great choices for Calvin. The best advice I can give you is that if you're new to the game, use someone else and get the hang of the basics of the game. Then, if you want a challenge, use Calvin. You can look into the great communities of Facebook, Reddit, Discord, and Board Game Geek to get tips from real Calvin players, and they're definitely out there. It may sound like I've been really harsh on Calvin, and I hope what you take from this is not that he's a bad investigator. My intention with this, since you presumably are a new player, is to discourage you from using him before you use any other investigator. I feel that starting off with Calvin may sour your enjoyment of this game because of how advanced Calvin is. There are many people who rate him as one of the strongest once you get a hang of him, and I'm sure there's some legitimacy to this. I'd also love to see some great Calvin decks linked in the comments below. I'm going to link a pretty good deck that I found online in the video description in case you wish to try him out. Rita Young is fast, very fast. She can evade like no other and can deal free damage to enemies she has evaded. Alternatively, she can move for free after she successfully evades an enemy. These special abilities make her amazing at moving around the board, unlike any other investigator. Of the Circle Undone investigators, Rita is probably the least complex, but it can still take some time to learn how to use her successfully. Her evade ability is great, but hunter enemies can still be a problem. It's also very easy to forget her ability when you're evading and taking advantage of some great action economy with her free move or her free damage. I recommend using something to remind you of it whenever you evade. Maybe a token, something like that. Rita has a lot going for her. Her agility is so high that with just one static agility boost like track shoes or trench coat, she can reliably evade most enemies, at least in standard mode. Her combat is decent at 3, which means she can be pretty good with a fire axe. A great strategy with Rita is to evade an enemy that is not a hunter and then move to another location for free, or evading a 1 health enemy and dealing them 1 free damage to get rid of them. You can also evade enemies with Retaliate and deal them 1 damage, followed by a fire axe to the face. One thing that Rita lacks is clue gathering. If you're using her in solo, it might be a struggle to advance if you don't get the right opening hand. You'll definitely want 2 flashlights in your deck and every survivor card that can help with clues such as "look what I found" and newspaper. The other thing to mind with Rita is her sanity. Pack some cherished keepsakes, and I highly recommend also using Peter Silvestri for some worry-free horror mitigation. As a survivor, Rita has access to some phenomenal cards that can also help her in a variety of situations. Be sure to go over the top survivor cards I mentioned earlier in the video and consider their use in a Rita deck. A card like Lucky can be a lifesaver when you have limited options to pick up clues, and succeeding every intellect skill check is vital. I've posted a great Rita deck you can use in solo games in the video description below. Be sure to read the deck's description for tips on using the deck. Released as a promotional incentive for the Deepgate novella, Silas Marsh made some waves when he was first announced. Silas Marsh has not seen an official release as of the making of this video, so his official signature cards have been named, but they haven't been revealed yet. He's also difficult to find in some countries. His current signature cards are replacements, or cards that you can use as a set in addition to or instead of his normal signature cards. This video will cover Silas in his current form. Silas is one of those investigators whose special ability defines them more than most. In a Silas deck, every skill card is insanely useful. The timing of his ability basically works like this. You take a skill test and commit a skill card. You then pull a token from the chaos bag and determine the modifier. At this point, you can make a decision. A. If you're going to succeed anyway, without committing the skill card, you can kick the card back to your hand and use it again for another skill test. Or B. If you're going to fail anyway, despite the skill card you committed, you can kick the skill card back to your hand and use it for another test. Or C, if you're going to fail, but the skill card you committed will help you pass, keep the skill card committed and ensure that you pass the test. Needless to say, this can save your skill cards and ensure that you use them only when they will count, which is a tremendously powerful ability. In fact, it kind of reminds me of Lucky, only instead of being reactive, it's kind of more proactive. Hard to explain, but I'm pretty sure you'll know what I mean once you use him once or twice. Now, Silas does have his weaknesses. First, his intellect score is low, so his clue gathering will be below average. His ability can certainly help, so it's not a huge deal. His other weakness is his low sanity threshold, combined with a low willpower. You'll have to find ways to mitigate this. Peter Silvestri is a good choice for an ally to help with this, but I prefer giving him a teddy bear and using Yaoto as an ally. Yaoto can give Silas an edge with skill tests by giving him even more uses for his skill cards that are in his discard pile. Both are good choices though. Silas is well suited to be a generalist with a lean in towards combat. This makes him a great solo investigator and very helpful to a group. I can't wait to see what his regular signature cards do, and I'm sure they'll make Silas even better. And that does it for today's video on Survivors. I hope this video was helpful for you, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Until next time, I am Innkeeper Vase Odin of the Twisted Tentacle Inn. Check in anytime. I'll talk to you then.